today about how forgiveness is not an emotion. You know, we live in a culture that is full of hurts and full of distractions, and we equate, unfortunately, in our Christian culture sometimes, the idea that I want to forgive somebody because I know I should, but I don't want them to get away with it. I want them to have this sense of injustice, to be aware of what they're doing. And we feel like somehow if we say I forgive them, that we are somehow condoning or agreeing with or acquiescing to their bad behavior. And so it's a struggle because we have this strong sense of justice and what's right and what's wrong. And we feel like we've got to lay that down to do the forgiveness thing. And I'd like to share with you actually what Scripture says. Because in Mark chapter 11 and verse 25, Jesus said, as you stand praying, forgive. Now, when he said, as you stand praying, forgive, he took that out of the realm of the emotions. He just said, as you stand praying, forgive. It's a decision. You know, you think of it this way. Jesus was on the cross, you know, drawing his last breaths when he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. There wasn't an emotion involved in that. It was a decision saying, look at those Roman soldiers. They don't realize what they're doing. They're just following orders. Stephen in Acts chapter 7 and verse 60, the last verse of Acts chapter 7, as Stephen is being executed by stoning, which is a long and painful process. But as he's dying, he says, Lord, lay not this sin to their charge. It wasn't that he was feeling warm and fuzzy about all those guys throwing rocks at him and killing him. It was that he made a decision. Because Jesus said, as you stand praying, forgive. Now let me take you through this, because this is what I want to differentiate. The decision to forgive and the emotion that that goes with that decision can be separated by years. In other words, you can make the decision to forgive one moment, but it could take you 5 or 10 years to work through to the point to where your emotions agree with your decision to forgive. In my own life, it was this way. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. My dad and mom lined us all up on the sofa when we were 11, 9, 7, and 5. We were stair-step kids. You know, I was the oldest at 11 and a half. 11, 9, 7, and 5. And Dad said that he and Mom were getting divorced, that he was leaving. And my little sister, who was 5, didn't understand, because in that day and age, you know, divorce really wasn't all that common, certainly not in our family circles. And my dad said, I'm divorcing your mother, I'm divorcing you kids. There won't be any birthdays, holidays, Christmas, nothing like that. And so, you know, in retrospect, I know he didn't mean to inflict hurt, but he was just trying to lay it out there, saying, I'm divorcing your mother, I'm divorcing you kids. It was incredibly cruel to 11, 9, 7, and 5-year-old. Well, it was not only that, but my little brother and I counted up about 23 times. We stopped counting after about 22, 23 times of broken promises. You know, I'm going to be there at 4 o'clock. I'm going to be ready to go because we're going to go get some ice cream or something like that, and no show. You know, and pretty soon it got to the point we didn't want to, when he called on the phone, we just didn't want to talk to him. And by the time I could drive at age 16, because his some promises he'd made to his new wife, I could only see my dad by driving to his work and going in the back entrance to his work. And then he would begin or end every single meeting saying, remember, and he'd name his wife's name, and he said, she must never know about this. If she ever finds out, I'm going to deny it. So you can imagine on a 16-year-old kid having to have the secret relationship with my dad by going in the back entrance at his work and having this little private meeting and being told this never happened. You know, so she had no idea he paid for college or gave me $500 towards buying a used car for college. Nothing like that for years and years. She knows now, and they've been married a long time, and I bless them, and I don't have any problem there. But I'm saying as a growing up kid, you know, you've got all this things that kids do as far as blaming and wish I wasn't here, and you know, if I wasn't born, Mom and Dad would still be together, all that sort of thing. And but when I received the Lord, when I believed on the Lord when I was 16 years old, all that hurt, all that rejection, all those broken promises were stirring around in me, and I made the decision to forgive my dad. Now, it took 10 years, and in that 10 years, Barb and I were continuing to date. We got married, we had kids, we bought a house, we owned a business, you know, all the different things that were going on at the time that I was at 26 years of age for me. And what had happened in that 10 years was that I walked through, step by step, every single hurt. I rehearsed it. Sometimes my little brother or maybe my sister or something would say something or do something or write something. Dad did this or dad did that. And they would stir up this pot, stir up the past, the memories of the past. And I would have to go back every time this happened, every time I'd work through it, I'd have to go back and bring my emotions to that decision I made when I was 16 years old. I was trying to obey Jesus when he said in Mark 11:25, as you stand praying, forgive. So I made it a decision. I could see his decision on the cross. I could read Stephen's decision in Acts chapter 7. They were not emotions, they were decisions. They were just intellectual decisions that I need to forgive. But here's the thing, I didn't want them to get away scot-free, and I wanted them to pay. I wanted them to realize the hurt that was inflicted in me. And so it took 10 years. I'd go through event after broken promise, after hurt, and I would rehearse all that and stir myself up in all this stuff, and then I'd have to go back. I would end it with okay, I forgave, I decided to forgive, and so I gradually every emotion became submitted to the original decision to forgive. And one by one, when I did that, the memory would remain, but the hurt was removed. And it took 10 years to work through that. 10 years. I remember distinctly different incidences, different letters from home, different things that would, my brother or sister, somebody would say or write or something like that, and it would stir me up, and I'd have to work through it, and I'd say, no, I decided, and gradually, bit by bit, it got down to, at the 10-year mark, it got down to the point where I realized that the underlying thing that that was really hurting was that I missed my teenage years with my dad. That, I dropped out of Boy Scouts after a year. All the other guys had dads, not me. I went through a series of finding things. I took scuba lessons. I took flying lessons. I did all kinds of things trying to fill that source. And I realized, through my teen years and those secret meetings with my dad, I missed my teenage years with my dad by his actions. And then by the time, I was 13, 14 years old, I didn't want anything to do with him anyway. But we still maintained the relationship well into, adulthood and all that. But I had to work through all that. And finally, when I got to the point that I realized my teenage years were gone and they would never be regained or relived or anything, but it was during that time that I received the Lord and somehow it was all okay. Once I realized the emotions submitted to the decision that I'd made 10 years earlier, that was the last thing. And so now all those memories remain, but there's not any hurt that goes with it, because I gradually over 10 years got my emotions to submit to my decision after I processed it. Now, Jesus said in John 20:22 or 23, let me see here, I may have a little note there. Yeah, 23, he said, whosoever sins you remit, they are remitted. Whosoever sins you retain, they are retained. So you can retain sins or you can remit sins. But sin has a powerful force in people. And that is that if you retain those sins to yourself, sin has the ability to make you into the image of what that sin is. For instance, I've got a little brother who struggled for years and years and struggled with becoming basically the spitting image of our Father. I've seen people that I know that have been, well, you think about, why does the abused child marry the abuser? Why does the child of alcoholics marry an alcoholic or an addict? And a lot of times it has to do because those sins are retained. And so that ability, the power of sin, is the ability to transform something into itself. And so a person can actually, unfortunately, become as bad as or worse than the person that they loathe, that they hate. And so it's important to make the decision to forgive. That doesn't mean you're going to feel warm and fuzzy about it. That doesn't mean you're going to be suddenly okay with everything. In fact, Paul said something interesting in 2 Timothy chapter 4. In verse 14, he said this. He said, Alexander the coppersmith did me much evil. The Lord will repay him according to his deeds. And then in verse 15, he warns him. He says, now you guys pay attention because he really withstood us and fought against us. And then verse 16, he says, when I was first arraigned in court, nobody stood with me, but I pray that the Lord will not lay this to their charge. So in 2 Timothy 4:14, he says, Alexander the coppersmith did me much evil. The Lord will reward him according to what he did. And then in verse 16, he says, when I went to court, nobody came with me, and I pray that the Lord will not lay this sin to their charge. So what's the difference there? The difference is this, that there are times where you forgive a person, But you say, Lord, I want you to handle it. I want you to take care of them. Vengeance is yours, it's not mine. So there is that sense of forgiveness where we make the decision and gradually our emotions will line up. But we also have the right, as Paul did with Alexander the coppersmith, to say, Lord, it's out of my hands, vengeance is yours, you deal with it. You deal with that Alexander the coppersmith in our lives. So that was my point today. I'm going to talk more next time about forgiveness and trespasses and sins and how that all works and everything. But for today, just realize that we are to make the decision to forgive, and doing so doesn't mean that they get away with it. It means that you're turning them over to God and He will deal with them, and just let it go at that. And realize that it's okay, that forgiveness is not an emotion, it's a decision. And so therefore you have the right, and you should work through the processes of injustice and the hurt that was done to you and everything else, and work them through